Hey everyone, I'm Julie Badal, and I'm here today with Sarah Bird. Sarah is a former neighbor of mine in Brooklyn, and she's currently based in both Brooklyn and California. She's a visual artist who basically believes that art and design can be a catalytic force that encourages us to protect the biodiversity of the earth. She's currently in a PhD program at UC Santa Cruz in film and digital media. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk to Sarah today about the role of art in encouraging people to have more of a connection with the natural world and the natural world within them. And also as a way of speaking to alternative ontologies that challenge and disrupt the harmful systems that are rooted in commodity capitalism and colonialism. So I'm so happy to have this conversation today during what is a challenging time in our country and in the world, and such a necessary conversation. So thank you for joining us, Sarah.
Thank you, Julie, for having me. It's a pleasure to see you on the screen after all these years.
Likewise. And I have to say thank you so much for all of I know that most of our conversation happens on social media. And I have to say that you are like one of the top 5 people that I'm looking to for guidance. And I so appreciate like all of the reading recommendations. I feel like I'm getting kind of almost like a graduate degree in Sarah's reading, you know. So I really appreciate that. And you're really on the cusp of so many interesting, intersecting fields right now. And just, I guess, first just to check in, how are you doing during this time? Like, what does a day in Sarah Bird's life look like during the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I'm actually on the East Coast right now, on Cape Cod, where I have spent time every summer over the past many years. And this is a transition time. My son has been at college for a year, so a big transition happened a year ago, and that was when I moved to Santa Cruz to start this PhD program. And so a typical day, well, today's day is really about swimming in the ocean and doing very little and reading. Awesome. Those are my 3 things I'm probably going to do today. But in terms of how it's been the past few months, I feel enormously grateful that I have had really intense kind of intellectual and art work to be doing. And that has made me focus on, things that are really important to me. And, the other side of that is that I was, since the beginning of the pandemic, I've basically been alone 24/7. I mean, up until the past few weeks when I've been with my son. And that is also a really interesting practice, to be really on one's own all the time. And
I bet.
So as you kind of mentioned, you and I met through yoga many years ago. And it's not just my yoga practice, but other kind of what I would think of spiritual practices have sort of allowed me to be alone a lot now, and allowed me to kind of live my life in that way, even though, of course, it's been thrust on me and so many of us. But I do also want to say that I am incredibly fortunate that I'm in this program. I have a safety net of a university. They provide my health insurance. Like, I have all of those things that so many people are, kind of rapidly losing. And it makes me, what I was going to say is that it makes me feel even more strongly kind of responsible to the environmental and social justice piece of what I care about and what I've been doing. But of course, that's what led me to wanting to do this PhD. And so of course, for much of, for many of us, the pandemic has revealed things which have always been true about social and environmental injustice. And so I feel lucky to be at the right place at the right time in terms of what I'm doing with my work. And of course, hoping to contribute in whatever small way that I can.
I appreciate you acknowledging all of that. There's so much to it, in terms of acknowledging that you're in a fairly stable position, and that stability is really inspiring you to be even more responsive to the predicaments. And that also that your art practice and your contemplative practice, your yoga practice, mostly your art, it sounds like, your creativity has been a source of refuge, in which you can convert what would otherwise be kind of maybe a lonely situation or a maddening, crazy-making situation into sort of this place of constructive solitude. It reminds me a bit of the isolation journals that one of the Times writers created, so that when you have a place, a container like artwork or journaling or writing to put your thoughts, then it transmutes it into something else.
Yeah, at the same time as I've been sort of physically alone 24/7, I also was part of a teaching team of 114 undergraduates. So not that alone, who of course, rightfully needed a lot of support as we instantly went online at the university. And then also in my role as a student in graduate seminars with just a few people in my cohort and a few faculty. And so the combination of, you also alluded to my crazy reading list. So the combination of really all of these very deep explorations I'm doing, and one set of texts kind of leads me to the next. So I was doing that on my own and with faculty and with, other PhDs in my cohort. So it was a very full intellectual and teaching, emotional connection, but of course all via Zoom or some other platform.
After reading some of the papers and articles that you sent me about your work, I can, I can see how satisfying, how deep, these rivers go in Sarah Bird. So I so appreciate that, and want to talk a bit about your current project, which is so stunning. I posted a video, and I'll post it again with the notes here, in which you have chosen a single coastal redwood in Santa Cruz to photograph. And at this point, you photographed portions of it to scale, but the intention, I believe, is to photograph the entire redwood at scale and create banners or different ways of displaying this redwood in full size in different urban areas, which is just so stunning. And I was struck initially by the story that you told about driving with your friend down the road and then encountering the redwoods for the first time, at least during this journey. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, actually, I was driving by myself.
Oh, you're driving by yourself. Okay.
Yeah, and it was one of the, it was a really extraordinary experience, and it alerted me to what I've been, or sort of opened up the possibility to what I've been doing ever since, which is really paying attention to what you described, or I probably did too, in that writing, is alternative ontologies, so other forms of consciousness. Because I was driving down this little windy road, and even though the Santa Cruz Mountains are very close to Silicon Valley and San Francisco, they are still parts of them very, or quite inaccessible, quite rugged, and the roads are really small, and their inaccessibility is the reason there are some old growth redwood trees left there, because they were too hard to chop down and ship to wherever. I see. So some groves, still exist. And I was driving down this little road, and I was going to photograph trees, and a few trees appeared on the roadside, and the road does lots of twists and turns because it was built to, go around the trees. And I had this incredibly emotional, it brought me to tears, this emotional recognition with this tree. And, you know, so my brain is simultaneously, or my whole spirit is simultaneously doing different things like, oh my God, what's going on? Like, am I really crying because I'm seeing this tree? And it was a kind of, the thing that I could most compare it to is that I grew up very, very far away from my grandparents, and I would go see them every few years. We'd fly to Australia, where I was born. And I would get off the plane and I would see my grandmother in particular, who I was very close to, and that kind of kinship experience.
It's like a reunion. You had this reunion.
Yes, and right, and also the, like, it was completely clear that it was about love, like no question. And so the fact that I experienced that in this little tinny rental car driving on a windy road in the Santa Cruz Mountains when I saw a tree made me pay attention, more attention, because of course I had already intended and I had started doing this project. And, you know, I think in our culture, we are, or certainly I feel like I was trained to like have a goal, follow it, achieve it, then have the next goal. You know, I was always a good student and I always made sure that I did all my work and all that stuff.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but it is also only one kind of way to make things, right? And to live and to have projects. And in photographing the trees, I really followed an intuition, because in the beginning I thought, I don't, like, what is this? What am I doing? Is it art? Does it even look like art? Does it matter? So all of those questions, but you know, I'm a working artist. And so I have been doing it long enough, and I feel lucky that I've really let go of what the final product is going to be. And this ocean drawing that I've done in the past couple of weeks, which we can talk about, is really an example of that. I mean, I had no idea what it was going to look like when I started. But that's a hard thing to get to. That's a hard sort of story to get rid of, because you know, our work is also a product, whether it's writing or visual art or whatever it is.
But I remember you writing that the tree, that sort of the sighting of that tree, the reunion or the recognition, brought you into a place of care that exceeded your understanding of it. And that I saw that as this kind of just releasing you into this wilderness of your own creativity, in which the outcome kind of it wasn't important as much as this process that you were going to go through with this tree, this relationship, you know, was being foregrounded. The care was really what was being foregrounded in that initial sighting, and it seems to be coming across and informing your work. And that's so beautiful, this idea of, you know, economies of care and attention. You know, we talk about the attention economy oftentimes in kind of negative light, but this idea of you know, in these urban landscapes, directing the viewer's attention to something that they could potentially care about, and obviously something that this tree person that you deeply love. And I see you almost as kind of like a medium, you know, for lack of a better word. I know that sounds a little woo-woo, but that you're, you know, that it's impossible to really be able to completely represent this tree, mm-hmm. as was articulated in a couple of articles about your work, but that you're in communication with it and able to be sort of something of a translator. And I'm wondering what the tree, and this tree maybe in particular, but the coastal redwoods, what they're expressing to you. I know that it may be beyond words, because most expression is.
I appreciate you using the term medium, because there are a few people who have said to me, like, oh, you speak for the trees. And I say, no, like, they speak, mm-hmm. and we as humans don't really understand that language. And so I feel like my job is to get quiet enough and also sort of alter my time scale, because I think human time scale and tree time scale are very different. So I appreciate using that term, this medium. I think of it as or myself as hopefully a potential sort of, let's see, I don't know if fulcrum is the right word, but sort of a point of contact. And So the tree in particular that generated that response to me, I actually didn't ask it any questions, but often I sort of ask an open question, and I say, to myself, is there anything you want to tell me? Or something like that. And I've had two very clear responses over a long period of time. So, it's a slow process. And the first time I asked a question, in fact, both times I got the response immediately. And the first time was, is there anything I should know? Is there anything you want to tell me? And the tree said, go slow.
Go slow?
Go slow.
Go slow. Okay, not go slow.
Go
slow.
Go slow. And, okay. And then the second sort of communication, which I think you will really appreciate as a Buddhist, is that I was in a grove in Northern California, also in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And it was during the time when the terrible fires were happening. Well, they've been happening, of course, every fall, but this was last fall, so fall of 2019. And I was just sitting among a few trees that are on this hike. And I apologized. I said, I'm really sorry that as humans, like, we've created this, these conditions where you're really being damaged. And I got this response, which really shocked me, which said, I'm not attached to whether I live or die.
Oh.
I was like, whoa. It's like, I'm not, like, I live and then I die.
Whew. That comes as something of a relief with the amount of guilt and pressure we're all feeling right now. And then it also speaks to just this incredible enlightenment and wisdom coming from
that. Really, I have to say, it really blew me away.
I bet.
I was like, oh yeah, you're that being. You're not like this human being. You're that being.
Right.
And that was really significant to me, actually.
It kind of speaks to, what you've written about in terms of right relationship, that in some ways in our techno-industrial mega machine, we've developed these superpowers, where we're burning all kinds of fossil fuels, destroying the earth, and we're making ourselves so powerful, at our own, to our own detriment eventually. But that we're kind of, we've outsized ourselves, or we think we're bigger than we are, and that in some ways displaying these, these photographs to scale can help bring us back into right relationship. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, that's exactly how I think about the tree photographs. Certainly in the case that you're mentioning with this. Oh, sorry. Let me turn off my technical situation here. I forgot to turn off my. Okay. So yeah, this idea of being in right relation. So when I was first photographing the trees, as we were talking about, it quickly became clear to me that they needed to be printed in life size. And that is really born out of what you were just speaking about, which is that we as humans over-consume. As you say, we've sort of made ourselves too big. And so in order to rectify or start to even to restore that relationship to a certain extent, we need to understand we're in a web. We're not in this kind of Aristotelian hierarchy in which men are on top, and then he made this list basically that has also informed Christianity and all sorts of Western, belief systems. But according to Aristotle, men, slaves, women, beasts, animals, and then plants. So this kind of linear hierarchy, which I think is pretty clear how that is not a just and potentially equitable way to think about living on this planet.
Right, or accurate in any sense,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about and reading about, and we talk about also in terms of with my colleagues, is, well, what do we even use this word nature? Like, what are we talking about when we're talking about man versus nature, which is of course a sort of, feels like a sort of old school way to talk about it, but that's still to a great extent how we think about it. And so thinking about right relation is also thinking about us living in a web. And so often I try to use this term web of being. But nature is also a good word. I mean, it's not like we have to, throw out everything, but I do think we need to, some of the books that we've talked about on text or whatever do really investigate, like, well, what does that mean that that's how we think about non-human life? But back to being in right relation. So it seems like a simple gesture, but it's something that I think has the potential for us as humans to simply bear witness to the majesty of these trees. And this kind of idea of recontextualization. I mean, what I would love to do is reforest San Francisco or other places in which, of course, we've put up these giant buildings. San Francisco itself actually didn't have, it was a few miles away where there were Coastal Redwoods because of the sort of geological formations there. Okay. But yeah, and thinking about right relation and thinking about physical scale was a way to, like, well, how do I intervene in that? Like, what is the gesture? What is the, what is the thing that I do in order to talk about that? And there was also another, I think I may have sent you some photos. I'm not sure. I did another artwork with a 320-foot tree. It was part of the 2018 Global Climate Action Summit, which was in San Francisco. And what I did was I made a crime scene outline of as if the tree, this 320-foot tree had been felled. I mean, they do get up to almost 400 feet, but this particular one I had in mind. So as if this tree had been felled, and I made on the ground out of this aluminum tape, basically, I made this long line, basically, which as if like a line drawing of the entire tree. And then I
led or murder of this tree, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there was that aspect of it, but then there's also, I led a group and we just sort of talked and walked the length of the tree. And that's a long way. Like 320 feet is pretty far. Obviously, it's bigger than a football field. It's so incorporating one's physicality, human physicality, into the physicality of the tree scale, I think is something that is a different experience than thinking about it or reading about it or even seeing it reproduced somewhere. But our bodies in relation to something way bigger than ourselves physically is a different experience.
Absolutely. It's an embodied experience, I mean,
right.
That's what you're saying. But I'm thinking of it in a contemplative way, how, we are these multisensory beings, and and that something like this physical experience, this interaction, can have impacts on us that we don't quite even fully understand because we have lost the language for that, but that it can return us to this place of knowing or connection. And yet it's a representation. It's not the full experience, because it's the ghost of the experience in some ways. It's so beautiful, and you talk a bit about the multiplicity of meanings, and of course, as an artist, I'm sure you're not prescriptive, and you certainly don't want your audience or any to walk away with one fixed meaning. And so I'm not necessarily wanting to encourage you in that direction, but if you were to think about who's experienced your work so far or your future audiences, what are some of the meanings that you might hope that they walk away with, or might guess that they might walk away
As you say, there are different levels, I guess, or layers that I think about when I'm thinking about the work. And one of them is really about affect, about physicality, and about creating the potential for an experience for someone else. I really don't want my work to be didactic. I'm not interested in beating people over the head about how good or bad environmentalists they are, or I am for that matter. I think that's not useful communication. And my kind of emotional, spiritual experiences, some of which we've described, with kind of being in communion with the trees, I want to make that possible for other people. And it's interesting. There's an artist whose work I admire enormously. Named Sharon Daniel, and she does an enormous amount of work with the carceral system and incarcerated people. And she and I have this sort of conversation where she urges my work to have a kind of more specific or immediately legible agenda. And which is a fair comment. And yet I keep trying to push a kind of physicality or a kind of experience that can happen that's not, for me, simply like brain eye. Of course, that is the gateway to much experience, but it is really, as you say, it's just one small part of it. And it's a kind of funny thing for me to say I'm a visual artist. And so but I think, visual experience or visual sense kind of takes precedence, which is not,
For sure.
Not, yes. But I think I'm interested in the other ones as well. So in terms of thinking about my audience, I'm sort of thinking about my contemporary work, or that I've been doing in the past, let's say, 2 years. So one of them is this giant tree project, and if someone sees it and sees it as like, oh, there's that giant tree. Wow, that's amazing. That's how big trees really are. Like, I'm good with that. Like, that is something that is, I think, interesting. There's this, in the 19th century, this idea of sort of the sublime and awe, which was very much tied with Christianity, but I don't think it has to be. And I think the research more recently that's been really interesting, which is about as humans, our relationship between awe in natural places and empathy. Like there are social scientists in particular at Berkeley. There's a center there called, I believe it's called Center for the Greater Good. I can send you I believe that's what it's called, but we can double check that. So social scientists have been really tracking that connection, which of course seems intuitively correct, right? But there is that connection. So between something in the natural world that produces awe and our ability to have empathy for each other and for other.
It makes sense. It's as if there's kind of a co-regulation going on at the nervous system with this thing that's inspiring awe. There's and that encourages some, what you stated before, this idea of encourages us to care, pro-social behaviors, encourages us to maybe want to, at least for myself personally, reimagine systems into systems of care versus harm, which was so beautifully put in some of your writing. Um, how has it changed you, this project and this connection with the coastal redwoods in particular, but more broadly?
Well, the recommendation of the tree to go slow, I've really taken that to heart. So these are really big systemic problems, and it's it can be scary to kind of make oneself emotionally vulnerable to the environmental and social devastation that has been created in this world, in particular by Western colonial capitalism. And in a way, it's made this idea of going slowly and being in service to the trees, which is, of course, not only trees, but trees are sort of my kin, my companion species, as the amazing philosopher Donna Haraway would use that phrase. It's really a relief to care about and to work really hard for something that's way bigger than me. Like, it's really set. It of course, I still need to make a living and to teach and to figure out my health insurance and do all those things. So I'm not exempt from that. But knowing that this is a sort of sense of purpose that I have just relieves me of, like, I don't care about, am I going to show at this gallery or that gallery? I just don't care. It's just not that important. I mean, I love to do that, and I love it when people buy my work.
Yeah.
People have been buying my work, which is, I always find, a miracle, and I love it, and it's beautiful, and my, I feel moved that people care and spend their money. And so that part is important, and I need to make a living. But that is the byproduct of me pursuing this thing that feels not only really important to me, but I hope, as I said, in some small way, make some kind of contribution.
Yeah.
And that's a relief.
It's almost as if the scale, it's as if you're staring out into the ocean, looking at these coastal redwoods. It's as if the scale of the work and also the time, the sense of time, which is kind of you're entering into redwood time, or not quite geologic time, but kind of, entering into a different sense of time. And how that in some ways is dissolving the ego, or at least letting the ego rest a bit, and
Yes.
your own personal ambitions are waylaid to this bigger, awe-inspiring being. And it makes me also think about how the redwoods themselves are like, a cathedral. And in the environmental movement, there's this notion of cathedral thinking, this idea of starting work that, will not be finished in your lifetime, but that it's meaningful nonetheless, like the building of the cathedrals, in the Renaissance, or prior to that. But how this in some ways is, as you're saying, so much bigger than you, and that that's okay, and that's actually perfectly right, and that you're in right relationship with the work, you're right size to it in that regard. And how we really can take away, like, I'm going to look at my own work in that regard too, and sort of see how I can get into better relationship in terms of scale and in terms of the intention, and how the intention of care and community kind of as you said, survival is still important, but and practical, and you need to be grounded in this reality in the material world, but from there there's this place that you can go in relationship, and that art can be that, that it can be this, for lack of a better word, this incredibly spiritual experience that is also activist and is also a change agent.
Yeah, and I think this idea of that metaphor of building the cathedral is really perfect, because it really separates intention from outcome,
Mhm.
right? And so in my life, I can do all the things that I hope to do with, a kind of positive intention, shall we call it. And the outcome of it is, of course, I hope for certain outcomes, but I'm able to kind of set aside specifically what that is, and so the time scale of that is not relevant really to me. And time scale, I'm glad you brought that up too, because it's something that I'm experimenting with a current artwork, that I've been working on, that I started during the pandemic. I have this giant roll of paper, and I have this little house in Santa Cruz. The biggest wall is 10 feet, and my paper is 6 feet. So I have a 6 by 10 foot piece of drawing paper up. And I started drawing a tree, sort of a similar, like in its true scale. I have a particular tree in mind. And my kind of physical labor of drawing this tree in charcoal and kind of attending to it every day in my living room has been a really interesting practice. And what I've decided to do with it as a way of kind of speaking to ideas of time scale, and also to your question of what is who is my audience? How do other people see this? As I'm actually making a stop motion animation from this drawing. So what is happening with charcoal is that, and I can send you some stills from this, even though it's just in the beginning of its life.
Wonderful. Love that.
So it's this charcoal drawing where the tree trunk part is lighter and white, and then the background goes black. And then what I'm doing is I'm sort of drawing a little bit, take a still, drawing a little bit more. And so as an animated film, one will see this tree trunk emerge from darkness, and then slowly, so into the light, as if, imagine a tree trunk being slowly illuminated by moonlight, and then a cloud comes and the tree gets really dark again, and then it emerges into the light again, and then it gets dark. And I'm doing this. I haven't quite
Fantastic. Yeah.
decided on the rhythm of it, but it will have some kind of relationship to breathing, human breathing. And so to kind of think about a connection between time scale, the physical kind of systems that happen in trees, which is much slower than in humans, but they do have electrical impulses in the same way that our nervous system does. I can't think, it's like typically it's depends on the plant, but about 1/70th, I think. Anyway, I would need to have that number. But basically, make that, to draw that line out and make that connection for people in this it's going to be very simple. I will be drawing and erasing for a long time to get this, it'll be, I don't know how long, 6-7 minutes just of that happening through the labor of my hand. So I'm not going to just do it once and make a loop. I think the way that, I take each individual frame, I shoot it with natural light, so that changes during the course of the day, and my labor with it, I think, we'll see, to be determined, but I think and I hope that it will have some sort of alchemical reaction where the tree will have its own being through my being.
You've animated the tree.
Yes.
Yes. And I love that you're not just, looping it, that it's really authentic in its sense of time and process. And is the breathing at the scale of the tree breath or the human breath? I
think it might be more human breath.
Okay.
That's what I'm thinking at the moment. One of the things that we haven't really talked about, but I think is something interesting to ponder is this idea of anthropomorphizing them, right? And so I am a human. I think with my human self.
Yes.
And so, really being sensitive to the fact that, of course, I'm imposing all of my perception on this tree, and as much as I'm humanly capable, to allow its being to speak to me, right? But that active interpretation is something that happens through my human self.
For sure. But I feel like I've all, as just back to the college days and sociology classes and things like that, I always was taught that anthropomorphizing was a bad thing. You're projecting, or you're, but it also has a very colonial root to it. It's like, don't actually recognize the life in this other animal or plant, right? So there's also kind of a warning in it that I feel I've just now come to recognize. So I really appreciated when you used the word anthrocentrism, in one of your papers. And this idea that, yes, we don't necessarily want to project our humanity onto a tree, but it is sort of still its own sentient sovereign being,
Mm-hmm.
and that we don't have to cancel that piece out by centering ourselves. So I appreciate so much that you are years ahead of me in thinking through all of this and actually actualizing, these visual representations of it. And I hope it comes to New York.
I would love that.
Here.
I would absolutely love that. I mean, we'll, it's, I had this very wonderful sculpture professor many years ago when I did my MFA, and her name is Linda Fleming, and she's a sculptor. And we talked about all sorts of things, but I remember having a conversation with her probably relatively soon after I got my MFA, and she kind of sat me down and she said, Sarah, just do the work. Like, because we were talking about, like, how do I make a life out of doing this, and and over the years I've been in many businesses and film world and teaching and all sorts of stuff, but just keeping my focus on doing the work. This is in response to saying I hope it comes to New York, and I sort of feel like if I keep doing the work, it will find its home. It will find its right home as I keep doing it.
Just anchoring yourself and centering yourself on the work, not necessarily the response to it at this point. Right. I mean, and that really shows it really shows, I have to say, in the bits and pieces that I get communicated to me through you. You're engaged in such an authentic process, and that's what makes your work and this interview so compelling to me. And I so appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday. And yeah, just thank you so much for this talk. I think I'm gonna end it here because I don't want it to go on too long. Otherwise it might deter folks from watching it. So I want to keep it a little on the short side, but I feel like we have so much more to talk about, and this conversation will definitely continue.
Thank you so much, Julie. Yes, it feels like chapter 1 or something. Yeah.
It sure does. Okay. Good luck
so much.
And keep us posted. I will definitely post links along with the interview, and any photographs you have, please do send me.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Enjoy the ocean today.
I will.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.